All right, so panel, my question is, in the current climate of, I suppose, heightened Islamophobia in Australia, how much do you think ordinary Muslims are internalising that negativity, and how do we address that?
So I'll just speak from a general clinical perspective. When I've seen patients who are from a Muslim background, that part of the presentation might be experience of discrimination and racism and how that impacts on people's perception of their self and their well-being. Feeling rejected by the community or the society at large can have a really negative impact on your sense of self and your place in the world.
There's a hadith, the beloved sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, the worst of people is the one where you choose to go silent when they're present, اتقاء شره, so that you avoid their evil. That's the worst of people. There's an interesting latifa from this hadith that you can get. If you were in a setting where you're constantly afraid of the repercussions of being who you are, you make yourself small and you go silent. And then you relegate your responsibility that has been given to you by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I mean, the Quranic narrative and the approach and the attitude that a Muslim should have is not an arrogant one, but it is an assertive one. That you come to the table with, you're wrong, and this is why you're wrong, and by the way, this is the truth, and this is how things should be. And we've internalized this discourse so much that Muslims in a span of 20 years went from, when it comes to politics at least, voting conservatively, to voting not just liberal, leftist, but far left. We're more left than the most leftist person out there. We support causes that, I mean, even Lut's wife would be like, damn, you guys really went far. I mean, I think, Allahu A'lam, this is something that needs to be really like teased out and studied sociologically speaking, and to see like the actual outcomes of what has happened. But when you, just as an outside observer, just looking at the Muslim community and the trends that have taken place and the narrative that has taken over our minds from September 11th up until now, we've really changed. And we've adopted positions and beliefs and approaches and the way that we even act and what we celebrate. Even our artistic expressions as Muslims are suspect now. We now have Muslims, practicing Muslims, putting out shows on TV where they have really, it's just fornication, flat out, and they joke about it, and that's us being accepted. Now we're popular, we're acceptable, we're not taboo. So more so than just at the individual level of what being rejected means for the person. Oh, I'm going to be feeling depressed, anxious, all of these things. At the societal level, I fear for what that has done to us as a community and our adherence to Islam as a religion, being a way of life, not religion in the modern sense of the term religion. Allahu A'lam.
I don't think I can beat that answer. Just a couple of things from my own research. So I did research with Muslim adolescents in Islamic high schools. They were very much aware, when I interviewed them, they were very much aware of all these issues. They had big grievances against the media as well. They would go on and on about how they thought about the media. But this doesn't necessarily mean they're going to become radicalized. There is a very typical assumption that racism, Islamophobia pushes someone to become radical. There is mixed evidence to say that. My own research, other research, I've come across 2 other pieces of research in the Western world where racism does not predict radicalization. So that's something we did need to bear in mind, that Islamophobia doesn't push us to become against the mainstream society. There is the theory, though, that if you are oppressed by a majority group, you will then go on to strongly hold on to your own identity, and that's what we do find. These instances of Islamophobia, when we're confronted by them, we don't then just throw in the towel and say we're not going to be Muslim. We are very strong Muslims, mashallah. We should really pat ourselves on the back for that. That doesn't necessarily mean we're going to become radicalized, though. Yeah. Jazakallah khair.
Just to add to that, my wife is a lawyer, and she gave me a really interesting example. Jurists, if you have a jury of your peers, they found out that there's usually one leader that emerges and then sways the whole jury to accept the punishment or the judgment or whatever it is. So yes, on the one hand, minority groups can become like the Orthodox Jews, for example, in New York. Very observant, because they went through a period of oppression, and so they really hold on to it. But the opposite can be true, where you can have a number of leaders emerge from a community that can sway it the opposite way, so that they can adopt the mainstream popular narrative and just kind of lose out, and just so that we become unseen, if you will.
There is the other option too, where they actually go more extreme. In some cases, the theory does say you will become a stronger group member, a stronger Muslim, but then, and this kind of feeds into the whole assumption that racism pushes someone towards radicalization, is that if an outside group or mainstream society is attacking us, ridiculing us, vilifying us, we are going to try and seek shelter in the best place we can find. And if someone's throwing a cannon from there to me, which way am I going to head? As far away as possible. And the furthest way possible, according to some theorists, is going into something that's furthermost against what that society is attacking us for. In other words, going towards an extreme. That's what theory says. But research, like I said, mixed evidence. Racism doesn't necessarily mean you're going to become radical.
Thank you. So we have a question, yes. While we're heading over to that question, can I just ask, you answered the first part of the question that I had, which was, are we internalizing the negativity? The second part of the question, how do we address that? Is it just through prayer? Is that how we address it? Do you want to have a go?
I talked enough.
Yeah. Did either of you want to have address that? No. Okay. All right. Well, I'll assume then. Well, it'll come out with.
It's really just about community. You know, like just gather. It starts off with small groups. People getting together and having, connecting with your teachers, connecting with the tradition. You guys got to remember, the Islamic tradition is not didactic books that have just been written and then just passed on. This is Sheikh Rajab Santurk. I can't remember the title of the book, but if you just put in on Book Depository, Rajab Santurk, R-E-C-E-P, Santurk is S-E-N-T-U-R-K. It's his thesis, his PhD thesis, when he did it at Yale. He's the president of Ibn Khaldun University. And his whole work was about how the hadith tradition was not just about transmitting the statements per se, but also the spirit and the conduct and the character and all of these things through time. So when you sit with teachers and you have this kind of continuous chain of transmission, you actually adopt these characters and you become something of that. And so you have your own identity, and so you can. So I would say maybe that's a way to get out of that. Allahu Alam.
Okay, so let's hear from a questioner. We have, a gentleman over here.
Any quick and simple solution to get rid of depression without the medication?
A good question from our brother over there. Who would like to have a go?
Okay. I will talk from the experience of colleagues that I've worked with and courses that I've attended. So exercise is a really good way of getting some of the endorphins released into our body, and really going on some healthy habits for lifestyle and well-being. Might not cure depression altogether, but certainly there's some research to show that daily exercise has, it's been proven to help with levels of well-being.
I would also reiterate exercise and also being in nature. So these are just some of the things that are good for our mental health and well-being. Exercise, being in nature, social connection is really important, and also gratitude is important.
Great. Brothers, you want to say anything?
I think, as a caveat, you need to first establish whether you have clinical depression or you're just feeling sad, you know, and you have to identify that through a consult. You need to sit down with a professional, and each case is separate. But just generally speaking, human beings are social creatures. There are some studies looking at, for example, the prevalence of postpartum depression across different countries. And what they've shown was actually there are countries where they have zero incidence, the 0% in the population, versus up to 40-50% in a population, in another population. And the explanations that are offered for that has something to do with the social network that a mother has after giving birth. You go, for example, to Sudan, Africa, generally speaking, I can't speak for the others. You know, a woman gives birth, she's not going to be sitting alone by herself. I mean, you literally had a soul pass through you. I mean, that's a significant event. It's not about the physical, I went through labor. You had a soul that was breathed into your womb, resided within you for 9 months, and then that came out of you. So it's a very massive event that took place for the woman. And so in traditional societies, the first 40 days, you're not going to have that time to yourself. Usually people come to you and say, how's the baby? And forget about the mom. Like, who cares about the mom? She gave birth, let's just look at the baby. But cultures where they have this connection and everybody's together, because human beings are social creatures. If you even go through an evolutionary model, they will tell you that we evolved as parts of a group. And if you read Sebastian Junger's Tribes, it's a very fascinating account. He showed that people in the midst of war, the Bosnians, they were yearning back for that time because it was the time when they were the most connected. Despite all that trauma and all that attack and the genocide and everything, they were the most connected together. And after the war, they had a sense of malaise, like, I'm disconnected again. So while exercise, going to nature, having plants in your house, if you can have birds, cats, things like that, all these things are great, but I have to emphasize, don't just make it about the individual, you need a social network that is beyond your silos in Facebook. It has to be a real human connection where you actually see if 85% of communication is nonverbal, you need to have that feedback back and forth. And right now, most of us are relying on less than 15% of communication through Facebook comments and posts, many of which are just vitriolic, to be honest. So.
Sister Anissa would like to add something.
When you talk about, as human beings, we are really hardwired to connect. There's some really good research on the blue zones. So these are pockets of people around the world who live up to maybe 100 years or more. And you look at what they call the power of 9, and these people have a plant-based diet. They move naturally in their environments. They have a siesta. They're fortunate enough to have that siesta every afternoon. But one of the strongest connectors for them was that they belong to a tribe, and so that social connectedness is really, really important for levels of happiness and well-being. So have a look at it when you're next on the internet. The blue zones, pockets of people around the world, and the power of 9. Some really fascinating work there.
Thank you. Okay, our next questioner.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much for being here tonight and giving us your time, your precious time. I'm Princess Lakshman. A lot of people know me as Sister Ikra. From my experience with children, and I've started to do a lot of counseling sessions, coaching sessions with children especially now, I feel that the stories they share with me revolve around pressures that they feel relating to academic performance. And my question is especially to you, Sister Anissa, when you gave your presentation, there was emphasis on academic performance. Now, I feel that that automatically dismisses the child's creativity, because when you talk about academic performance, immediately comparisons, scores, grades come up. And the poor child then suffers pressure not only in the school environment, but also at home, because culturally we are conditioned into competing rather than collaborating, and creativity brings about collaboration, whereas academic excellence is focusing on competition. And I am struggling to understand why we as adults, when we know that inside each one of us, we also have our depressive moments, and we feel like we are a child still inside waiting to be heard. So we may ask our kids at home, how was your day? What did you score? Or what was the exam like? What did your teacher say? But we fail to ask most times these three questions. Do you feel loved? Do you feel safe? Do you feel like you are being heard? Where are these questions for our children? And unless we answer these questions, they will grow up to be in adult bodies, trapped children who haven't been heard. Thank you.
A powerful point. Yes.
Yeah,
who would
very
like to-
powerful question.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sister Ikra. So, when it comes to academics in schools, and we know that traditionally or historically that's what school drives, is the academic performance, but there's a huge shift in terms of looking at well-being and social emotional goals for students. So even just the way teachers might greet students when they arrive at school in the morning, so that personalized greeting, really getting to know their students on a more individual level, measures that we're looking towards in terms of embedding this across the daily practice in schools. So yes, I totally agree that historically we've driven the academics, but there's a shift, and that's a huge challenge that I have, particularly in my role in schools, is to start talking to even staff at that very high level or principals around students or children should actually have triangulated goals when you're looking at their schooling life. So you're looking at an academic goal because that's what traditionally we go to school for, but we're looking at social emotional goals as well for students, and we're looking at behavioral goals, and the social emotional goal is tied in with their well-being goals. So really starting to shift that dynamic of just always looking at the academics, but starting to focus on well-being and behavioral goals as well. So I think it will take many, many years for this shift to actually happen. There are some state schools across our region who are doing that particularly well. I can talk of one school where every student in that particular school, and that's only one school, I'm very mindful of that I work with, where every student has a social emotional learning goal. So it's really powerful, but students themselves from a very young age, so from prep, are starting to think about my self-awareness, my self-management. When I'm feeling angry, what should I be doing? And acknowledging that we all have emotions. So when we're talking to students about self-regulation, okay, and we're talking about emotions, we have negative emotions and we have positive emotions, and that's totally okay, because we have to, as human beings, experience the range of emotions, but it's what we do with that and how we respond to that. So we are starting to teach children from prep, going up into the high school years, on how we can regulate our emotions and how we can look after our well-being. Still a long way to go, a huge way to go in terms of shifting the thinking around that. I hope that answers that for you. Partly? Yep.
I think maybe how it doesn't fully answer the question is that I think the point that Sister Ikra was making is that the whole school system, the way it's designed, and that focus on competition and academic excellence undermines everything else we might be trying to do in pockets to try and, build people's social and emotional well-being. It's like on one hand we're saying, yeah, we really care about you, but on the other hand we're saying, do this now and forever. Okay, yeah, and that's a systemic, it's a big picture thing, which, it's huge. Okay. Did the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam experience depression or just sadness?
اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد عدد قطر الأمطار وعدد أوراق الأشجار وعدد الحصى والرمال. When he sallallahu alayhi wa sallam's son Ibrahim passed away, you gotta remember this is like you had Qasim, you had Abdullah, you had Kulthum, you had Ruqayya, you had Zaynab, you had he sallallahu alayhi wa sallam was just burying one child after another and then one daughter after another. was born as an orphan, didn't know his father, and his mother passes away when he's 6, and his grandfather when he's 10, and then his uncle. It's just like, if you look into his life, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, it's hard. And then finally, to finish off with Ibrahim, who they say in the seerah that he looked the most like the beloved sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And his response was, إن القلب لا يحزن والعين لا تدمع ولا نقول إلا ما يرضي ربنا وإنا لفراقك يا إبراهيم ولا محزونون. So he says that the heart feels sorrow, the eye will shed a tear, but we will not utter other than what is pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And for separating from you, O Ibrahim, we're sad. He was never depressed. You gotta know, like he for those who don't know, the trip of the Isra and the Mi'raj, he sallallahu alayhi wa sallam was shown some wondrous things. And he saw the position of people, and he knew where everybody would end up. He knows, I mean, he was there. He knows exactly the reality of all of this. Allah showed it to him. So for someone who knows all of this, why would he be depressed? Why would he be in a state of anxiety? He knows exactly what's happening. So, but he experienced emotions. He called a whole year after the passing of his beloved wife Khadija radiallahu anha and his uncle Abu Talib. He called that whole year Am al-Huzn, the year of grief. It is normal for people to have sadness. This is just part of the expressions of normal human emotions. You have to go through your ups and downs. But depression, if you look into, for those who have any clinical experience or have seen it, there are certain signs for depression where they experience no joy in anything. They have this flat kind of affect. They talk to you and there's nothing going on. Their voice is really, that life is hopeless, and there's no point to any of this. I had a patient actually when I was interviewing her. I felt like the countertransference that I was feeling was just immense. And she was basically Nietzschean in her description of existence. She's like, what's the point? It's like, and she looks at me, she's like, what's the point of what you do? You work, you study, you do all these things, and then at the end of what? You die. You cannot, I mean, if you go with the Quranic narrative, you cannot fall into that state with the exception, and I have to say it's actually not a common exception, of clinically depressed people. There's a segment of the population, they actually have there's an imbalance of some sort, there's something going on for brain structure, brain function. But that's not the common thing. There's an overdiagnosis in psychiatry for depression, where, I mean, when I hear these numbers, 25%, 1 in 4, 1 in 3, I'm just like, okay, this clearly is not an issue. And there's a joke, if you get 3 psychiatrists in a room, you'll get 4 different opinions and the patient won't even be there yet. And that's the truth. I actually sat down in consults. In 1 week, 1 patient, we had 3 different opinions from 4 psychiatrists. Because everybody's coming in with their own value systems of what they think is the problem and how this person has gotten to that. And this patient was schizophrenic, mind you. So he's having hallucinations, and forget about the depressed patient. And then, so there's a lot of things that go into depression that I just don't see. I mean, this is why I said at the beginning, challenging realities. If you accept the current paradigm of mental illness, you will come up inevitably, if you go dig deep enough, with questions about the beloved Sallallahu not just being depressed, but also having epilepsy and schizophrenia. Musa alayhi salam, Isa alayhi salam, you'll have all these questions, because if you accept the current paradigm, these are the questions you'll come across. And your answers are not going to be sufficient if you accept their definitions. So that's all I got to say about that.
Assalamu alaikum. I have a question for Brother Riyad. Is media responsible for aggravating the level of disorder of the person's mind who is about to commit a serious act? Does it play in his mind?
Could the media aggravate the person?
Yeah.
So one of the factors that I did mention was leading up to the attack, the person might have experienced a stressor, major stressor, including the legal to attack an act of prejudice. So they might become a victim of prejudice. Or they might, like, if someone who has mental illness, has schizophrenia, the TV is talking to them. right? So when something happens on the media, the person takes it seriously. Like they're seriously offended by themselves. I think that reporter is talking to me. So it's possible. In the absence of research, I can't definitely say yes, that happens. I'm not being a scientist myself. But it does make sense that the media can definitely aggravate people. And the evidence does say a proximal stressor, an experience of prejudice does occur preceding the attack. But that might not be the only cause or the single cause. It might not be a cause, but it's there. I know that's a bit of a wishy-washy answer, but I don't want to make a conclusion without evidence enough to say that that's definitely the case.
Because Trump watches Fox News, and then he does things. So, what do you say about that?
I don't want to go to prison.
Okay, I might just jump to an online question while we're moving about the room. Okay, so in our communities, mental health issues are associated, can they be exacerbated by those saying if your iman was strong, you would not be suffering from this? How do we then support our loved ones going through mental health struggles without insinuating or accusing them of a poor connection to Allah and without coming across as self-righteous?
So the question was, how do we support our family without blaming them, saying it's because of their poor iman?
Without sounding like we are insinuating that they have a poor connection.
Yeah. So I think before Dr. Mohammed Gilan in his talk mentioned also that we can blame people for mental illness and their mental health issues, and I think that's something that is not particularly helpful for anyone, and also it's not putting, there's no one, it's not a person's fault that they're struggling with their mental health at the time. And putting that blame can also add to that burden of distress for that person. Certainly spirituality is an important part of our emotional health and well-being, but there are also other parts of our health and well-being that are really important. And I think as a family member, it's really hard to see someone that you care about struggling, and how do you support them and help them. I think listening is really important. Asking questions to the person. Sometimes we can be afraid to ask the question, worried about what the answer might be. So talking to them about how they're feeling, what they're experiencing, and then supporting them to seek support if that's what they need at that time. Sometimes when you're in such distress, it can be really hard for you to problem solve your way out of it or to ask for help in that situation. So I think the main things I would say would be to listen and to ask and support.
Do you have any other comments? No? Okay. Any other questions?
Yes.
Yep. Over here.
Assalamu alaikum. My question is directed at Sister Nisa. You mentioned dependence on the devices and screens. So have you got any advice for us as parents who have a constant sort of war with our youth regarding access to devices where we might resist for many years and finally you succumb, you give in, but there's you're then constantly trying to sort of get it back or limit access to it, and part of the justification is I need to be on the social scene, I need to a lot of the Instagram, etc. This is the way that kids are socializing. So how do we not exclude them from social circles and create isolation, and how do we still allow them to interact and be socially accepted, etc. with their peers who are obviously involved in this, while still maintaining good balance and allowing them the other beauties of life that they should be enjoying.
So I knew that was going to come up. So, it's a really tough one, and I think personally I can't give any, my personal opinion on that, but I think everything in moderation. For me, the intent of even showing what I showed this evening with, the effects that it has on the brain and on the body, I'm just hoping that as parents we can make informed choices, informed decisions then on how much of screen time we actually allow our children or how much of interaction you allow them on the devices. So I hear what you're saying in terms of wanting to, keep up with the times for that social communication, but then we've also spoken about, human interaction and social interaction, which is really important. It's a very difficult decision for many parents and families to make, and it comes down to individual choice around that and what we choose to do for our children. Yeah. So, even going back to basics, so having some rules and some boundaries, that's what some of the researchers tell us in this field. When we get people to come out and talk at schools even on the use of technology in a safe way, and how much of time children actually spend of it. But creating some boundaries at home around how often you might use it, when you might use it, is dinner time a technology-free time, allowing devices in the bedroom, etc. Those are all choices and decisions that individual families actually have to make. Yeah.
Further question?
Assalamu alaikum. I would like to know from the panel, from the readings of the Quran, that Allah says that if you appreciate His blessings, all the blessings, as much as you can, if you can appreciate His blessings, and then be thankful, to understand the blessing is one, and then be thankful of the blessing, He will increase you. He will, Allah will appreciate so much of this that He will increase you in many ways. And I think that would have a very broad effect on the mental aspiration and the mental setup of people, because it's no doubt that we are lacking in this upbringing, in this education of the Quranic psychology and sociology that is supposed to guide us. I think this is a neglected area in our teaching, in Islamic teaching. Thank you.
Do you agree that this is a neglected area of our Islamic teaching? It's a beautiful point made here by our brother.
So the verse the uncle was referring to is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَئِن شَكَرْتُمْ لَأَزِيدَنَّكُمْ وَلَئِن كَفَرْتُمْ إِنَّ عَذَابِي لَشَدِيدٌ. If you are thankful, certainly I will increase you, and if you are rejecting, if you're denying the bounties, then my punishment is severe. Look, the thing is, it's at the moment that you are all listening to this, you're seeing us right now. The reason you're seeing us is because light has reflected from the stage and it went all the way into your eyes. That took time. And then your brain had to process that information. That also took time. And then it came into your consciousness. That took more time. More time got taken for you hearing this as well. The sound waves that came from me to you, to your ears, activating the acoustic nerve, and then processing in your brain. That also took time. So at the moment that you're comprehending everything that's being said right now, you're living in the past. It already happened. If you think about the past too much, you end up in grief because of all the things that you missed out on. Now, thinking about the future, things that haven't happened yet, so you have anxiety. So the idea is that you want to try to achieve presence in the present, which can only happen with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if you have that, then nothing really matters.
But reflecting on the questioner's point about how we teach Islam, I'm thinking in our madrasas and
we have the culture of Allah is angry. I think a lot of us, my dad calls it thaqafatul rabb al-ghadib. It's the culture of Allah is angry all the time. If you don't do this, Allah will punish you. If you don't do that, Allah is angry with you. And if you don't do that, it's a sin. And so you don't give enough time to be thankful because you're always afraid that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to punish you and nothing you ever do is good enough. And eventually some people get fed up with this whole narrative and they just say like, well, if I'm doomed anyways, you know what, let's just go all out, kind of a thing. And that's what happened with a lot of youth. So yeah, you have to change the narrative to, when you study hadith, the first hadith that you ever study is Ar-Rahimun yarhamuhum ar-Rahman, yarhamu man fil ard, yarhamkum wa yarhamukum man fis sama. Those who are merciful, the merciful in the heavens will be merciful upon them. Have mercy upon those who are in the earth, and the merciful will have mercy upon you. And you understand from the hadith that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Sabaqat rahmati ala adabi, that my mercy is always overtaken and will always supersede my punishment. So when you have that understanding, then you reflect on all the bounties that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you, and you teach people to really sit back and have these 5 minutes of meditative gratitude, you know? Like all the things, the fact that you were able to get up this morning and walk over to the bathroom and relieve yourself, akramakumullah, and then to wash yourself in the water that you have access to, that it's clean water. You don't have to go all the way to the river and get it and come back. And you had taken your lazy behind to the kitchen and you just open up the cupboard to take your cereal. And then, like, it's just, you have so many blessings, and if you just exercise that constantly, you'll have a different perspective regarding Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, yeah, I would say that we have a problem in our Islamic education. We don't focus enough on this stuff.
Anyone want to add to that? Okay. Any other questions? Yeah.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jazakumullah khair. It's an excellent panel, mashallah, and good moderator. My name is Hazim Hamouda. I'm privileged, of course, to be back home as I have spent over 40 months in a prison in Egypt after being in Australia over 33 years. Married, I have 6 children. It was basically, again, accusations of being a terrorist, etc. And it's interesting talking about so many diverse subjects today, which makes it extremely hard to pinpoint exactly where the question should be. But nevertheless, I think the common part in our conversation today is related more to the constant feeling of apathy that exists within not just our community, I think it's worldwide, and may I say this. And that apathy had resulted from the lack of purpose. It seems like our young men and women are lacking the purpose. I've noticed this even back in Egypt where I was, again, amongst a lot of young men and women from diverse works, diverse ages, diverse ideologies as well, from all the way secular, Democrats, liberals, Islamists, etc. You will find that the common thing is there is no clarity of why am I here, where am I going, why should I do this and why should I do that. And I think the point here that I would like to share with everyone is, and the question will come to the panel, is related more to where do we go from here. Mindfulness and being at presence is a key point, there's no doubt about it. But we need to have a roadmap ahead of us to see how we will meet these challenges, and each one in their specialty. And there is no doubt that the medical condition related to a psychiatry is always there, and that's why psychiatrists play a major role from a psychological perspective. The holistic approach to our diet, to our activities, to our inclusion, to our education, to our spiritual health and well-being, they are all holistic approaches to building that young men and women that we aspire to see and hand over the flag to in due time. So therefore, my question to the panel, how do we coordinate all of this knowledge that we have in a place where it can then be of a benefit to the society as a whole, and to our own community, and to the community in Australia as a whole? Thank you.
Oh, a big question. And before I hand it over, I just want to say, brother, we're just so happy to see you here. And we make dua for your family and you on your journey ahead. I know it's not over just being home. We're really happy to see you. So who do we have here? We would like to. It's about coordinating our knowledge, pulling it together, providing a roadmap. Do we need to pull together our knowledge and a roadmap? Do you agree with the premise of this question? What do you?
I don't really have an answer, but I just wanted to shout out Occupation
occupational therapy, because everything that you were talking about there was very occupational therapy based. Part of the model of care of OT is that having a purpose and meaning in your life is really important for your health and well-being. But I don't have an answer.
The only thing I would say is there has always been a tradition of a mentor and kind of an organized group that we say that we have a collective purpose. And that mentor, generally speaking, for Muslims anyways, the Ottomans, they've always had a sheikh, including the Khalifa himself had a sheikh. There's always a sheikh involved. And the sheikh's function, shout out to Arturo, Resurrection. If you haven't watched it, you need to watch it. What are you doing with your life? It's on Netflix, and it's on TV Al Noor. The reason I love this show, and it's so significant, because it shows that you don't have to be a sheikh and a scholar to do the work. This is like a common maybe misconception among some actors. They think that the imams and they're expecting you to be a scholar of Sharia, and you don't need to be that. What you need is you need to have a constant connection with someone who can remind you of your purpose. And there are scenes several times throughout the show and all the seasons where Total feels a little bit of sorrow, feels defeat, feels something, and then all of a sudden the character of Ibn Arabi shows up and he just reminds him. And he says, remember what you're doing. And remember what this is about. It's not about here. It's about ensuring that Allah's justice is established. It's ensuring that people are going to be taken care of. It's ensuring that the truth will manifest and prevail. And even if they have a day for them, you got to remember that you're going to have your day as well. So there's always this connection. The Torah was not a memorizer of the Quran who was like sitting in the masjid doing dhikr all day long. He was always up there working, but he always come back and check with the sheikh. So I would say that you need to have that kind of spiritual mentorship. You need someone that keeps you in check. And even when, spoiler alert, close your ears. There was one scene where Total is burying his wife, and he's just feeling like he's like, I'm at a loss. That's it, it's over. Like, what am I? I'm really feeling down. And the character of Ibn Arabi comes to him and he says, Awlad, like remember, young man, like this is not about you, it's not about your wife, there's a bigger story here. And the scene is so powerful that it really, it gives me goosebumps. I get goosebumps just thinking about the scene. Because it's so powerful, it's a good reminder of like what this is, the ultimate reality of existence is. The problem is there is a show on Netflix called The Family. I don't know if you guys have come across it. It's a new show that came out. It's like a documentary of sorts, a dramatized documentary of how you have all these clandestine groups that arise and they basically run society. And so you have the most powerful people in the world today are the ones that you don't know about. They're not out there. It's not the politicians. It's the people behind the politicians that are close-knit in groups and they do the work. And they're not looking for accolades and they're not looking for recognition. They just want to see their vision realized. And there's another series, Sultan Abdul Hamid. I don't know if it's translated into English. But it's interesting about it because it relies on historical records. And it shows all these groups that are working behind the scenes to make sure that their vision is realized. Our problem in the modern world is that everybody wants to have their day in the sun. We want our 15 minutes of fame. I want to be recognized, I want my platform, I want being impressed with my own opinion and that people are pointing to me. Rather than, let me give you the tools and you go and do the work and make sure that the vision is realized regardless of if I see it or not. And you see it in this Arturo show just once again, where he says, I'm just going to plant the seeds and maybe my sons or my grandsons and grandchildren will actually see it manifest. That's actually what happened. He didn't see the Ottoman Empire rise, but he planted the seeds. We need to have that approach of, regardless whether it happens in my lifetime or not, my reward, ajruhu ala Allah. It's with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I'm doing this for the sake of Allah. That's purpose. And then coordinating together where we recognize that, hey, we got a psychologist over here, we got an occupational therapist over here. I mean, I see it in medicine now, where the patient comes through and we just recognize allied health. Okay, this patient needs this and that. We need to connect them with the physiotherapist, with the occupational therapist, they need exercise physiology, they need a psychologist. And we just connect them with all of these different people to give them that holistic approach. Our community needs to have a holistic approach where we see all of the educators and the OTs and whatever, and then everybody gets together and we say, you take that task and you do it, without micromanaging each other. That's our problem.
Yes.
And so, that's what I'd say.
Yeah.
Okay, I've got a few very interesting online questions. I'm going to try and ask the panelists to be very brief and keep their Netflix references very small for future questions. Okay, so we have one here from online. Should we continue sending our children to the schools knowing that they are teaching them things that are not acceptable in our religion, like LGBTQ and evaluation?
Evolution.
Evolution. Sorry, now makes more sense.
LGBTIQ is taught in schools. It's out there, endorsed by the government. I don't have a, personal opinion on that. It's what's happening out there in schools. Do we continue to send our children to these schools? Again, I think you can choose to, look for a school that will fit in with your philosophy of what you're looking for your children. But it's also about raising awareness for children so that we become more tolerant of others in our society, in the society that we're living in, that we're able to interact with these people as human beings, that we show tolerance, we show respect for the diversity of people that we live with. So we might have our personal opinions about that, our Islamic perspective on that as well, but just in terms of who we're interacting with and how we teach our young people to interact, I think is important. So.
Okay, I have another question from online. Are our leaders trained enough in dealing with mental health issues? Because people generally approach them first when they need help. I think by leaders they mean imams. And it might be better to ask what more could be done to support imams when it comes to responding to people that are coming to them with mental health issues. Maybe Ewa Blackstrom.
I mean, I think every imam is different, right, in what their training is. I think that a good imam also knows the limits of their training, so if there's something beyond that, what they're able to do, they will direct the person into the right space. In my role as a clinician, we've worked with imams, so it's part of the person's treatment plan, if you want to call it that, will, there's important spiritual needs that need to be met, and I don't qualify to do that, so we work with the imam to do that, and then there's the other mental health side of things that happen as well. So I think there's lots of people that can be involved in someone's health and well-being.
One of the, a workshop that I attended around suicidality and preventing suicide and understanding suicide, the practitioners in that session were talking about how if we are to remove the stigma of suicide and actually get people to open up, we have to normalize suicide and that discussion, if that makes sense.
You have to normalize the discussion.
Yeah, so that people can actually open up and talk about their struggles. And I think it's first recognize the gravity of this. The fact that someone is contemplating killing themselves. What gets you to that point? Rather than, and yeah, I agree, we should, and that happens a lot in clinical settings. Like you get trained on how to get someone to express, have you had thoughts of self-harm? Do you have any auditory hallucinations that are telling you to harm yourself? What do you think happens when you die? We go through all of these things. But I would say we have to, from an Islamic perspective, yeah, I can tell you it's haram, sure, but what would make someone go against the self-preservation drive? It's a pretty significant thing. So I think we would have to, in the discussion, try to find the root causes of these things, rather than just simply declare something is impermissible and that's it, and then just say enough of that. So we would need to have people who are trained not just in clinical psychology and all that, but also in Islamic tradition, so that they can weave in these concepts together as they have that conversation. And it should be it's not going to happen in one session or two sessions, let me just fix you up. It usually is a build-up of events that has happened that leads someone to get to that point, where they finally start to contemplate self-harm. At least from all the interviews that I've conducted, I've conducted quite a few in my rotations. there's always like a prodrome, if you will. There's like a long, drawn-out process beforehand that finally gets into this point of hopelessness. That, okay, I'm done with this. This life is no longer worth it. And I don't actually pay attention to their religious beliefs at that point, because it's really doesn't matter. They've lost hope. So you have to find out where did they lose hope and why, and how did it get to that point. The religious kind of aspect, that's at the end afterwards. Once you deal with these root causes, then you can bring in the religious conversation, I would say.
I think the questioner was touching on the stigma that tends to be, particularly in our community, around suicide. And I guess this sort of ties together, so I'm going to wrap this up, so I'm just going to try and do that here. There's been a few questions that have come back to this of, so for example, what brother over here asking about do we need some sort of warehouse of our knowledge that combines our Islamic knowledge and principles with psychology? Then the other question about, are our imams well equipped to respond to people with mental health issues? And now this question about how well can our community or can we handle people that come to us saying they're contemplating suicide? All of this sort of points to how do we have, how big is this area now, this area of combining psychology with Islam, and how well developed is it, how well evolved is it, how well practiced is it? So do we have, and is that a space that we actually need to develop further so that our imams are, and all of us are more able to integrate the newest knowledge with the most ancient and grand knowledge in the Quran?
I think we were recently in Washington with a group there, and Ustad Yahya Rodas from Muqazil Institute he was expressing his experiences now as an organizer of kind of a religious institute and a retreat and all of that. And they recently went through a psychology workshop, and he said he didn't realize how much he was lacking in his ability to help people until he went through that workshop, because it gave him tools to be able to deal with people. Because he said religion in these settings, it attracts people that are wayward and they're looking for answers and they have mental health issues and stuff. And so he started to really recognize the utility of clinical psychology in his work as not just a community leader and a religious figure, but also just someone as a mentor and a helper for these people. So I think number one, imams, I know they have a lot going on, but that's the career you chose to serve the community. So I think it's imperative as part of imam training that you go through some sort of some fellowship or some sort of training in psychology. You need to understand how the human mind works, what motivates people, what gets them going, mental health, when to refer people, to recognize some red flags and signs so that you can say this person needs some professional help. And so imams really need to go through some sort of training like that. And the same thing goes for counseling as well. They need to have some sort of a crash course in counseling, because imams are getting involved in marriage counseling, which involves psychology as well, and they're giving some terrible advice because they just don't know what they're talking about. And it's not a knock on the imams, you don't know. And you being married is not a qualification. You could be a terrible person. Not assuming anybody's terrible, but
not reflecting on any.
No, yeah, not as a particular person, but I'm just saying, like, you have to have the training properly so that you can help people in a professional way, in a systemized way, recognize red flags and signs, and then refer them if you need to, and do your job properly. So imams need to kind of wear multiple hats at the same time. And I would say that clinical psychologists in the community, and mashallah, we have Muslim psychologists. I see the names when the GPs are referring in the hospital. I see the Muslim names coming up, and it's like, oh yeah, that's a Muslim, that's a Muslim, that's a Muslim. I think they need to get together, psychologists, and create some sort of a workshop program. I say this is for imams. Imams need to have a psychological training so they can help people.
What do you think of that, guys? Yeah. That ties into what you were saying before about us sort of leaning in and collaborating more. Okay, well, we might call that wrap up the Q&A. If I could ask Brother Imam Bazari, he's around. He's got some special gifts to give to our esteemed panellists. Could you please give them a round of applause? It's very uplifting to be in the company and presence of such dedicated individuals, and I know that our community is very rich and richer for them. Okay, and I would like to just a few little wrap-up thank you notes while we're giving out those. So, if you are at the Challenging Realities Facebook page, please like the page and add a review. Ah, thank you. I hope it's chocolate.